Hello everyone, and welcome to the second meeting of Book Club B. Uh, as you know, we'll be discussing Invisible Women today. Before that, just a few housekeeping things. I think, as all of you read in your email, we are very proud to announce that we've officially tied up with Penguin India for our book club. So, huge props for that. And they reached out to us. They liked the idea of the book club, and for the upcoming month, they've been kind enough to suggest a passage north for our book club to read for the fiction side of things. As we are reading non-fiction right now, we'll be reading fiction next month. And three lucky people from this book club get the book for free as a giveaway. And the rules for it are very simple. After this meeting, please go to any of your social media. It could be Facebook or Instagram, preferably Instagram. Go on your social media, either post or put it up on your story, tag Kitabi Karwan, dust off your books, and Penguin India in it. And we'll be picking three random people from the book club itself. So don't worry if anyone else posts about it. It's only going to be people from this particular group. Three people who are going to be getting the book sent to them directly by Penguin. Also, a small thing, the book releases on 13th July, so I would advise all of you pre-order it right away. Right, and even if you think you will win it in the giveaway, you can always cancel your order. That being said, the other group was I felt bad for the other group because I think I haven't informed the group yet that the other book that we've chosen is Remnants of a Separation by Achal Malhotra because of, well, it being very close to the to Independence Day next month. And yeah, and they weren't getting a giveaway or free books, but somehow we tried and we managed to arrange a half an hour live interaction with Achal Malhotra at the next book club meeting for that particular group. So you guys get the giveaway, they get to interact with Achal Malhotra. I guess win-win, win-lose. I don't know. We can figure that out, and we will probably be obviously we'll be releasing the video too, and we'll try and give you guys exclusive access before it goes public, right? Um, I think enough with that. Let's just talk about the book, and I'll slightly be taking the back step here, as because I was talking to Navya about this before the meeting started. That firstly, A, because of my throat, that I shouldn't be talking too much, but B, I think it kind of seems redundant to have Navya hosting this as well and me taking the lead on organizing things for a book while discussing Invisible Women. So I'll just offer my comments and leave it at that. And then and I'll obviously chime in with some inputs whenever I feel so, or whenever I think I have something to offer. Right. Firstly, like in fact, I was pointing this out to Navya this like a few minutes ago. I received a post from one of my closest friends about why it was just one of those supposedly funny tweet which turns into an actual um thread of tweets to describe problems in society, which talked about how men in marriages today have, or how difficult it is for men to get women today, because it just sounded like, why do men find it so difficult for women to like them, right? And the idea being very simple, that we are actually just 2 or 3 generations away from a situation where women practically relied or needed men for anything, for be voting, opening a bank account, or just for, to the extent that New York had laws where a man could punish a woman and make them walk in public as a walk of shame as late as the 1900s. So it's a probable fact that most of our families, and like almost all our families, we come from a very, as a given fact, we come from a very patriarchal set of society. We walk in this terms, and it's very interesting to have read this book at this particular point of time, because we're walking into an increasingly data infested world and data driven world. I mean, think about it, like literally everything that you do. Like I was particularly blown away by the chapter on how voice assistants are not very are like less able to detect female voices and their recognitions while taking terms of dictation, while they are deemed to be the future, right? That, or like even the fact that we were discussing about how Hardeep Deol's catch, by the way, huge cricket buff here, and I saw that catch and it was absolutely fucking mind blowing as to how she pulled it off. It's one of the best catches I've seen. I think the only other person I've seen pull this off was AB de Villiers once, some like years ago, and that too was nowhere close to what this was. But it was nowhere on social media. Barely, like a few people posted about it, but nowhere else. And this just takes away from the kind of data that is being generated around, well, catches that are being done. A very interesting thing that's, I think, I know how many of you follow football, even I don't, but something that's a huge thing in England right now is bring it home or bring it back home, one of the trends
It's
that's going on.
coming.
It's coming home. Sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I don't follow football at all. But yeah. So, but the fact is, it never left home. It's not that England has not won the World Cup since or the Euro since. The female team has won it multiple times. It's just that, well, somehow that doesn't count, right? So yeah, I mean, those are just like some interesting snippets I figured would be things that I could point out before the meeting starts. So I would just hand over to Navya to take this over.
I don't want to spend too much time talking about the book myself because I loved it, but I think it was like a really important book for everyone to read, especially men also, because I think often they don't understand the struggle sometimes, because for them it's like the data is everything is built for them. And I thought that was one of the biggest things that came out of the book, was the fact that cities are not built for women, they're actually built mostly for men. And one of the examples that I loved was the one on the bus stop, where they said that if only bus stops were closer to parking lots, then it would be easier for women to feel safer when using public transport. And so small things like that, and even the example of the house where the kitchen was like facing the window instead of facing the, so that the mother can actually look after her child while she's in the house doing the work that she needs to do. But I thought these were things that were really important and things that we probably don't consider when we're walking around the city. We think that, okay, this probably was built for me, but in some sense it really wasn't, because I think even most city developers are not women, so they don't have their input in the say in how the city is built. And I think it plays a big part in like the safety of women and how they feel when they're walking around the city. But I thought that was something that really stood out for me in the book, was the idea of the city not being built for women. But I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys thought about the book also. So if anybody wants to kind of just share their thoughts, please go ahead and unmute yourselves.
Right. So what we'll be doing is anyone who wishes to talk can like raise their hand, and then either Navya or I will unmute you so you can like make your comments. And yeah, we'd love to hear from people first before we jump to the questions we've suggested, because I believe this is a very deeply decisive book. In fact, I just had a comment to make on what Navya mentioned, right? Like something particularly about not a lot of city designers being women. And the odd fact is that when you look at it, there, even if they're on the lower side of probability, there might be women who are actually city designers or in charge of making these decisions. The data set in fact in itself on which they rely to make these decisions is so flawed, right? So it might be an unintended perpetuation by someone of the same gender of the exact same things. He or she, like, she might be able to make a few changes that she thinks might accommodate for things, but then in this data driven world where everyone just needs data for everything, it becomes such a huge mess to do this. With that, yeah, so if there's anyone who wishes to talk, can you please raise your hands so we can start recognizing people? Mm, okay,
Okay.
okay, there are four
Uday,
people.
and then Sonal, Muskan, and then Anuso. Uday, do you want to unmute yourself?
Navya, I think we'll have to ask them to unmute.
Oh,
So, like, we'll have to unmute them. So I
okay.
just unmuted Uday. I think
Okay.
Uday can speak now.
Hi. So first of the book is really liked it. Firstly, because a lot of this is personally for me taken for granted. I know city design, all of this is very large scale, and a lot of people say that this is how the real change happens. But I think it's a little bigger than that. Where, say, for example, a friend of mine, a female friend of mine, and me were making a plan, and I said, let's meet up at somewhere around 8 o'clock. We'll do whatever we were going to do, and then we'll come back somewhere around 11:30 at home. It'll be fine. And she was reluctant to get into that plan. And I said, why? And she said, safety is a concern. That is when I realized the fact of safety being a concern was never really a factor for me. It never even crossed my mind that, okay, this is a problem. Maybe I need to address it. to maybe fix that problem or maybe make a plan to accommodate for that problem. Here, I in no way, shape, or form wanted to like make a plan that was actually detrimental to either of us. It's just that sort of like idea that maybe there might be a problem never occurred to me, which is actually why I think like more people should read the book, because there is this problem. You need to see the first, because like they all it's usually when a topic like this comes up, women become very touchy, men become very touchy about the fact, like it's not like men versus women. Often, again, this is my personal opinion, men don't know that there is a problem that exists, and if you tell them, of course they'll try to accommodate it. I mean, of course they need to take an active interest in trying to like getting to know it, sure, but for the most part, if it is communicated to them, they will obviously try to mold whatever plan they're making or whatever to accommodate this. At least that is what I thought. So at least in the large scale, yes, hundreds of large scale data, sure, but in everyday life there is a lot more that can be changed, is what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is like, especially coming from a male perspective, it's, you know, it's different to hear that that was something that, you know, you understood after reading the book or after speaking to your friend. But thank you for that, Sonal. I'll just
Yep. Hey, hi Siddharth, hi Navya. Firstly, thank you for suggesting this book. Like, this was really an eye opener. I am a computer engineer who works at a data science company and in AI ML. And I never really thought that, the data which we are seeing can be biased. So we have a lot of healthcare clients, and, I am a business analyst, but I do deal with clients directly. And I asked this to one of my developers that, we are solving XYZ problem at this XYZ healthcare provider. Are we considering the male and female data to be separate, or like, is the gender considered as a PII data? So I was surprised to know that it's mostly in the provider's hands, and like that gender to be considered or not while building these models to detect whether the image is faulty or not is actually in the provider's hand. And most of the time in Europe and in most of the countries, PII data sharing is forbidden, and that's why like most of the times that data is concealed. And the models built are gender neutral. But reading this book made me realize that okay, like models, like, it's just going to propagate that gender gap into something more worse. Like, people, women might not get the diagnosis that they deserve in spite of having, like, AI augmented models. This was really an eye-opening experience for me. And like, going forward, I've made it a point to make people aware that, this is something that can happen. Like, from my end, I've made it a point to talk more on this and at least highlight it to other clients who, like, might not realize that okay, like such and such a thing, such gender gap exists, and like, maybe consciously we should avoid this and maybe try and find a way around it. So this was something like very cognizable to me. Like, immediately I realized that in my like, even the voice chatbot example which was highlighted in the book, that was like extremely eye-opening, because like, I was dealing with these technologies hands-on, and I never really thought that, there might be such grave consequences to using technology. And it was really good to know, good to learn. I've, highlighted this to people. I have brought this up with people, and we're taking action on it, or at least, now we are cognizant of it. So going forward, at least we'll keep this in mind and at least make clients aware that, such and such things can happen. So really, truly, like, fabulous book, something which I feel should be included in every syllabus, because there are so many times, like, so many instances we don't realize that, this is happening, or like, things we think will make it better will actually make it worse. So yeah.
Yeah. Right. And in fact, Sonal, if I could just pitch in here, like, I mean, when you mentioned like things that stood out for you in the book, one thing that also stood out for me was the chapter on the washrooms that were designed, like, how like that, it actually blew my mind. And because again, I think Uday really pointed out right at the beginning that often it's just that men don't see the problem. It's not even like then there's a different subclass that might see a problem and still fail to do something about it. But seeing the problem is in fact the biggest problem I personally see. Because in my head, if someone proposes to me, without the book, that okay, we'll have gender neutral washroom, like, okay, that makes sense. But that idea of like looking at how women and can't use urinals, and that's why it takes up, like, they would require more space. They should ideally have a larger washroom with more toilets than men, which just made far more sense to me. But I think Muskan was recognized to speak next, I think.
Uh, for me, at least, this book not only burst my bubble of feminism, but also expanded it in a lot of ways. Because, you realize instances and like, the washroom one, of course. There was one thing that particularly called out to me was your phone headset. The way you use your camera, it's easier for men than women. I thought that I was the only one who used to fumble with the camera on my phone and I had to use both my hands, but guess what? It's just for women. Um, my there was one thing that really irritated me was that, and this is not to say that it was the book's problem. It is more of a society problem. For example, in that chapter where she talks about elections with the first past the person proportional representative system, where she talks about proportional representation gives a lot more opportunities for women to be a part of governance. But then, like, if I take up the example of India, where in local governance we have one third of seats reserved for women to increase their participation, the women who are elected in those seats at the end of the day are being guided by their husbands or their fathers, and those votes are being misused. Those seats are being misused by men by putting forward women. And I mean, uh, even if we do bring policy changes, how are we supposed to bring about a mental change in society with respect to women? Recently, I saw a reel on Instagram where this guy goes on to say that औरत को घर का काम अपनी जिम्मेदारी समझनी चाहिए और बोझ नहीं समझना चाहिए. एक आदमी भी तो बाहर जाकर बिजनेस करके आता है. And it made me want to puke so bad because so like again, even if caregiving work is given enough representation within GDP, is being paid for, how do we change this mindset that is so intrinsically wired in people? How do we bring about that change? It made me feel so helpless, and it made me realize that, as a feminist, like even within family, when I'm having on dinner table conversations, when you're talking about gender and like, certain remarks that our parents make, because उन उनको हमेशा से आदत है कि women और men के बीच में वो differentiate करते आए हैं. This change is very recent, and अगर आप उनको call out करो, of course there is a change that's coming, but then I feel that, my feminism is so restricted within my household or within my friends. How do I bring about a bigger change? And that made me feel so helpless. This book was super amazing, but it was super heavy for me to go through because it just broke me in ways that I don't think there's any coming back from that point. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Right. Right. And like Muskan, I think that's one thing that also not irked, but probably was like that feeling of helplessness. Because for me, it came midway through the book when I read the chapter about the plow and how agriculture, like how different agricultural societies have led to emergence of different kinds of perceptions of roles of women. And how do you combat that, right? How do you combat? So like data is what we today say as, is database driven technology is essentially, well, thousands of years of what's been happening is just some sort of data that's translated into what modern society's behavior is. How do you combat that? Like, because I mean, I was blown away by the research that for simply the fact that, well, you come from you trace your origins to a society which used a plow instead of a hoe, and that is why even like thousands of years down the line in a different country in a different climate, you are you will tend to be more patriarchal. That's just something, after a point of time, I couldn't really wrap my head around, okay, what do I do about it? How do I go from here, But yeah, that's a very, very fair point that you've raised, Muskan. I think, Anu, you were up next.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. Sorry, I don't have my camera on today, Siddharth.
That's perfectly fine.
So great book. This is a topic very close to my heart. I did my master's in feminism, and we studied and decoded language and how the language that we currently use has an inherent bias. And now here we're taking it a step forward and talking about how the data itself and everything that we currently do proves that there is so much unconscious bias, not just conscious bias that we see every day, but there's such a deep level of unconscious bias. And I think what the book helped us do was size up the scope of the problem, right? There's not just we see the problem, but there's so much more deep level problems that I think this book exposes. I think that's very helpful. And I work in corporate America, right? So for me, this book is going to be very helpful when I go back to work and tell my peers that we are trying to solve a problem, we're trying to do the gender parity, trying to move the needle positively for that problem, but there is much more deeper biases that exist. So I think that the book really helped me with that. Also, I think what that brings to fore is why representation matters, right? Because if you only have boys in STEM, they are only going to think from their perspective. And I think what Uday rightly pointed out is guys don't inherently want to be biased, but it's just that there's so much deep-seated conditioning and they're not able to see the problem. So I think this maybe will help in that, way that it'll make them realize that there is a real problem that will help them see. Yeah, I think those are my points in that.
Yeah, I mean, I love your point about representation. I think that's the root of the entire problem with the gender bias with data, is that we don't have enough representation and we don't have enough women putting their perspectives across and their needs, and that then consequently don't get factored into major decisions. So representation is definitely one of the biggest things that could help with this, because once we have more women, researchers who are on these teams collecting this kind of data and using it to, for example, build cities, that's probably when we'd see, things more working more in our favor versus the other way around.
Yep.
I think you have your hand raised. I think you're unmuted. Oh, you muted yourself again. Yeah, you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hi,
Yeah,
yeah.
we can hear.
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, hello. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you for this book. It was really an eye-opening book. And, I would like to point out the football fact. Well, I've been following it since a very long time. And, I literally Googled it. Like when I read the part that when you search the England football team, it actually comes, the only men's soccer team comes up. And I literally Googled it. And when I saw that, it actually showed all the stats and data regarding the past matches the men have played and the upcoming Euro matches. But it didn't show up any data regarding women's football. Whereas if we compare the England team of men and women have fared a lot better than men. I mean, they have represented England in Olympics. They have gold, silver, bronze, all the three medals, medals, and have fared a lot more better. But they have not gained the recognition they deserve. And that's literally the problem. And still, you need to specify the keyword that women team for England, and then the women's data and the Wikipedia comes up. So that's the problem, that even after giving so much to the nation, bringing up so much glory and victory, still they are not given the recognition they deserve. And it's the 21st century. We say that we have progressed a lot. We are ruling the business world. We are ruling the film industry, the media, or anything. But it's actually not the reality, I think, because there are a lot many problems, I guess, that we are still facing. I used to think that only gender disparity is limited to salary or till safety or anything, but it's lot more than traffic rules, safety rules, the bus rules, as they said. And the most shocking was table and chairs have been gender biased. I mean, uh, like they are materialistic things, and you are naming them, you're labeling them as male and female. I mean, we never taught. I mean, that was something shocking, because for me, the table was the table. It never got he. We never talked about table like he table, she table. It was always the table. But behind the naming the table, there's a logic. And the best part about the book is it had a lot of data, a lot of stats. But beneath these stats, there were some hidden truths which we were unaware of, which we have never heard about. And the best part is the book covered all the aspects. It talked about the number of statues. It talked about the women representation in the parliament. And, uh, India is said to be the land of gods. We are following many religions. We are worshipping many deities. Despite of that, if we take a ratio, like if we are like worshipping 100, out of 2 or 3 are the female statues that have actually been made up in India. I mean, the example there is given up about the US country, where there are like the male statues are overpowering the female statues. And the same is the situation in India as well. We can say there's Lord Buddha statue, we have the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, we have Swami Vivekananda, and we rarely can name any famous female statue that is in India. So like that's also a problem, where like we are worshipping women, we are telling Sita Ram, we are taking the name of female before male. But when it comes to prioritizing them or giving them the equal opportunity they deserve, I guess we are lacking behind, and we are far, far more behind. We thought that we are limited to certain problems. We have only certain extent, but if we see, there are many small, minute problems which we aren't aware ourselves, which I got to know after reading the book. Oh, okay, we have this problem as well. So like there are problems women aren't aware of, and still they're absent from the society. So yeah, that was my point.
Thank you, Bhakti. That's actually a very relevant point. And in fact, from statues, what you mentioned took me back to something that I read in law school about that India's constitution with constituent assembly had 9 or 10 women. That's it, out of like 450, 500 people, and like a constitution which is geared to be driven towards equality. And we do see, and that's in fact one of the key reasons why like we don't have reservation for women in built into our constitution, and it's still a raging debate going on. But it was a very interesting point that you made about men being default, right? Like about, like I think this was mentioned in the book about also the US soccer team. Like people, when we talk about football, like or soccer, how you wish to refer to it, the US doesn't really figure much in it until you actually point out the fact that the US soccer team has done excellently in the sport over the past so many years. And yeah, like that additional adjective to describe the team is the problem, right? I think Juhi was recognized to speak next, I think.
So, hey everyone, and Navya and Siddharth, you both are doing a great job. So I definitely don't use a lot of social media, but whenever I go back to Instagram, I just go and check out your profile. And Navya, you have been doing really great in the field of women health and a lot of other things. Now coming back to the book, this book was great, and I think I completed this book in a week itself because it was really interesting. And of course, there were lots of factual data, but just because I have always been into this whole women equality thing since my college life, so I think most of you have encountered some of the facts while reading this book. And but I did when I was in college. So being part of a lot of technical women tech communities, I used to have session on Saturdays and Sundays. And the one thing which we really noticed, actually I did not, one of the presenter there noticed, is when you go to Google and search into English, into the Hindi translation, he is a programmer. Hindi translate is यह एक programmer है. But when you translate he is a programmer into, sorry, I think I did it wrong. Okay, so when you translate she is a programmer, it comes यह एक programmer है. And when you go back and search यह एक programmer है into English, it automatically comes as he is a programmer, which is of course very tough and hard to find when you are doing a computer science engineering in your college and you do not see the Google search, which has been like already very famous. And even when you search developer, you will see, I think we have an image of developer as wearing hoodie, a man wearing specs and working on a laptop. And we do not imagine women into that phase, because we have not seen a lot of people, a lot of images into the Google search. Now there have been a lot of data factual things into this book, where the author also talks about this big data and how the next generation is gonna be totally depending on the data, and why we need more and more women into the STEM field. But the only problem is, even though we have a lot of representative into the organization and at the higher authorities who take decisions, how do we reach to that place in a country like India, where if you want to study, you make sure that you do household work parallelly with your studies, and at that same point boys are allowed. And no offense to any boys, but I have been brought up in a culture where I have always seen boys and men as a very most privileged one, that they get a lot of chance of studying or doing extracurricular activities as compared to girls. Because and if we do not do that, and if we always being into just doing normal studies and not being more ambitious and goal oriented, it's going to be difficult. And I think we see we have 63 to 65% of women's age between 18 to 45 in India. But the only problem is most of them comes from a middle class family, and middle class family girls, they just brought up with the mindset of taking care of their house when they are at their home, and when they get married, taking care of their husband's household things and taking care of all the older parents, like basically the unpaid work. And now if somebody wants to do more than that, I think I saw one of the point where author addressed that having a transport which is more convenient for women to do the unpaid work at home and as well as go back to work. I did not like that part, because even though we are going to try to make a more easier for women, but it still will be very overwhelmed for them in being at a very higher position, where you do have to take a lot of decisions and go through the burnt out of work and then come back to home and then take care of your child or elderly person or whatsoever. But life gets difficult, and I think that is one of the reasons why we see very less women after. So if you see most of the girls after getting married, they just leave the job because they come from a middle class family. They mostly earn to 15 to 20K or maybe 25K at very average part of the community which I'm talking about. But either they cannot afford servant at all. So and their men have been brought up with the mindset that they will not help in household work. And then it gets really difficult for them to basically cook in the morning and then clean the house and then go back to office and again come back and cook the dinner. And even though their in-laws, like mother-in-laws and other people, might have gone through the similar things where all the burden have been come to their shoulder, but they still do prefer their daughter-in-laws to follow the same routine and a totally the culture which shouldn't be following. For an example, in my case, I work and I have been working from home since last 1 year. I think we all have been. And at least in a middle class family like me, where my parents are not educated, they do not even consider sitting at table and holding the laptop or work. So for an example, if I give take rest for some of the time, and then my mom is like, free hai, chai bana de, chawal chadha de, bhai ko khana de de, and it's tough. For an example, if people say that we do not have a lot of female developers, which shouldn't be, even we should be using the term of female developer. Developers should be a gender neutral term, which should be used for male and female. But generally, we say that we do not have a female into this field because coding is an art. You cannot do coding for 10 minutes coding and then going and doing something else, or helping your parents or your brother or sister or anything. So I think having more women into the STEM field, we have found the solution. But the only problem is how we're going to reach there. And the life is really difficult for that. For an example, if men or a boys wants to pursue this field, they might have to do one time of hard work. But I think if girls, especially a middle class family girl who dream to be a computer engineer and really get into this data scientist and ML research, they might have to do, I think, 10 times more hard work as compared to boys. So the struggle is really hard. Apart from that, I think the urinal thing is something which was really eye-opening for me. I have never considered that before at all, that the space is, we might need more space as compared to men. So that part was also like an eye-opening for me. And this book is great. I have started noting a lot of things. For an example, I am not so sure how many of you work in a IT industry. We generally get 7 paid leaves each quarter, and it differs from company to company. And that is equal, same amount of 7 paid leaves for men and same amount of paid leave for women. But they have never considered that, the monthly going through the pain of periods is equal to the headache which men get. So mostly we might need at least 2 to 3 extra paid leaves because we have that 7 paid leaves. And definitely 110% men has to not go through the simple periods cramp which we go through each month. And we generally have been set up with the mindset that this is something monthly and then you have to cope up and then get back to work, which is, I mean, if I get a pain, I need to take a rest. But generally how unpaid work women, even a working woman does is if they get a pain, they take a 5 to 10 minutes rest, still thinking about the work which is pending there. And then they have to get back to work. So in that case, I particularly think that 7 paid leave is not enough for women. And even if you give 7 paid leaves to men and women equally, it should be, I think for girls and women, it should be more. And I know that a lot of you think that men have not considered women, and unconsciously they have forgotten to add us in the data. But one part I think Siddharth mentioned about the Constituent Assembly. So of course, there were a lot of people into the Constituent Assembly, but the drafting committees, all of the representatives were male. And I'm not so sure, I wouldn't have been reading just because he has done law and I have just started reading Indian polity and the constitution. But what I have seen is if you see the fundamental rights and if you go to the DPSP, because they did consider at some point we might be needing the maternity leave, and that has been added into the DPSP in like 1940s, which is, I'm not even sure that we had a lot of women representative that time. But if Bhimrao Ambedkar and a lot of other people from the drafting committee could think being like a man, and if you talk about the history, how did the whole this woman space into the society started by Raja Ram Mohan Rai, and he was a male. And if you see Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and these all people, they come up even I think before women, at least in India. And when we were writing the constitution, not we, actually our the assembly people, when they were writing the constitution, they never even thought about the thought of giving the rights to women for vote. But I think if you see a lot of other countries, there have been a place where I think in the beginning they had to consider, and then after that they got the rights to vote in the election. But in India, that was never even a point. And like he mentioned, in the whole assembly of 400 to 500 people, there were only 10 to 11 women representatives, and one of them were Sarojini Naidu. But in that particular case, I think we have a lot of men in our country at least supporting. But again, that's an exception. And I think the author was talking about the majority of the part. For an example, if you talk about the parliament, MPs cannot be absent for 6 months. Right, and if they are absent, then they have to do this re-election thing. So they are not supposed to be absent. But at least in our constitution, we have been allowed in certain exceptions for women where they go to this maternity leave, they are allowed to be on leave for 6 months. And I think, and if you talk about the maternity leave amendment act, which was 2016 or 17, I cannot recall it correctly. But I think we are one of the top 3 countries who provides 6 months of paid leave for women, which is of course recommendable in our country. And there are a lot of other labor acts and a lot of other acts where I think our authority and organization have tried to consider them, but the only problem is we do not have a robust system to implement all these. And I think the mentality problem, it will not go, even though we have a more and more representative women coming into the top authorities organization where they take decisions, we need to change the mentality of our society where they could allow more and more women to go out and take part in such things. And I think when generally we talk about leaders, I think I saw one of the video in the YouTube, and then there was some example, and leaders, the example of leaders automatically came as an male. But the only problem, just because we did not see a lot of female leaders while we were reading in the school, like I think the only 3 top female I could recall from my school were like Kalpana Chawla, Kiran Bedi, and Sunita Williams. These 3 were the only 3 personality I have read in school. So I think having more and more female representative and not forgetting them. For an example, I think the top 5 programmers were female who wrote. I think such things needs to be considered and added to the data. Of course, data really have a lot of value and points to play. But I think at least a country like us, we need a robust system to implement such policies and such thought. And of course, we need a mentality change where we women itself have to come up and ask for equality, that to let's split the work half-half. So something like that, I think we have to be like, more conscious about taking decisions. And yeah, that's all. I think I will not stop talking about this topic because I have been doing this for very long and fighting for such equalities, but I think that's all.
No, Juhi, that's quite palpable that you're very passionate about this, and thank you. You've made a lot of pertinent points, extremely pertinent points. And in fact, if I could just offer my 2 cents on one very particular bit that you mentioned about, because you spoke about a lot of things with regard to why India appears to have a far better constitutional right system as opposed to some other countries, is because there's a part of subaltern history which is not taught as mainstream histories, where a large chunk of Indian society, particularly the suppressed classes, or which would include women and Dalits and all your OBCs, they had in fact a very different understanding of the British rule. They wanted reforms within the system, and they saw transfer of power to like an independent India, just reverting back to an older system of the upper caste having the same power. And a very key chunk, I don't know, credit goes to Bhimrao Ambedkar for being able to, in fact, he negotiate this back in. But I won't take up more time. I think we have Sahiba Sachdev. I think it just fell together, so she's up next, followed by Muskan, followed by Gautam Rana.
Hi everyone. Yeah, sorry, I didn't put a space between my name and my surname. So yeah, it's Sahiba. So I think I was actually wanting to talk a lot about the book, but many people already have spoken before me, have spoken a lot about what the book has said. But one thing that I will really want to point out in a gender gap is, and something that I've also seen in terms of both data and in terms of just pure thought lacks when we talk about feminism or gender gap generally, is also how women perceive women. It is a lot male first, and how how are we so patriarchal in terms of the male ways of thinking, etc., but not the women's ways of thinking, etc. So that has always been a very peculiar thing that I've always been very intrigued about. So I will just give you an example of my organization when they did appraisals. So one of the things that so our MD was a woman. This is my past organization, and one of the reasons she didn't give an appraisal to another female colleague was because she thought that when she was at her position, she took 2 years to get an appraisal from this position to the upper one. Hence, she asked that. Hence, she didn't give the appraisal to that girl that time. However, in the male piece, when she was giving the same to a man, she never thought that was an issue, and that person got an appraisal within a year. So this is also something I think as a gap that really because patriarchal thoughts and patriarchal way of living has even for a person who's so educated and maybe thinking herself as a feminist in very indirect ways have been affected so badly that subconsciously the way they react to society and react to people can be very biased themselves as well. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to talk about. And the second piece was also in terms of when they're talking about maternity leaves. Even when you see in the corporates in India right now, when it comes to maternity leaves for adoption. So one of my friends, she adopted a 6 months old girl, whereas your maternity leave states that if the kid is below 3 months, you get a 6 months maternity leave. But if the kid is above the age of 3 months to 2 years, the maternity leave is for a month. So just she was not able to take care of her child with just a month's leave. A 6-month-old child and a 3-month-old child, I know, is a little bit of difference, but still needs equal amount of care, etc. as well. So those were very live corporate examples that I've seen in my lifetime of working. The other thing which was interesting was to see the perspective of West, even though a lot of the gender development books are very West oriented. So I was just feeling really bad about a lot of women in India, because we are not able to even get past the roti kapda aur makan. So we are not able to even, I mean, you're talking about women who are working and not getting leaves, etc. And then in India, you're talking about women who are not allowed to work. So I would have been very happy if the book also touched upon deeper and very more Indian scenarios as well. But obviously the writer is American, I think. So that's that. The other thing I really liked about the 4 points that Siddharth and Navya you had shared in the email, right? So one was about the nudge theory, and the other about that are women also equally biased towards male bodies or the way men are. I mean, there were 2 questions about it. So nudge theory, something which was very intriguing, because this is about I never knew about nudge theory. I kind of was just going through Wikipedia so I wanted maybe, in this forum we can discuss that more. I don't have much inputs on it, but I would really want that conversation to kind of be discussed here. So that'll be really great. Thank you.
Right. And Saiba, like one of the reason why I like being chose to include that question was because of how, again, like the 2 discrepancies we pointed out, right? Because it's been thousands of years of how this has evolved. And nudge theory essentially deals with that, right? Like the options that are presented to you are in such a way that you're nudged to make a particular choice, right? So that's quite
Correct. So I'll just take 30 seconds more. The reason I wanted to was this, because in the entire nudge theory, you're talking about positive reinforcement towards something, right? There's one of the parts. Right. Yeah, one of the parts. I was actually thinking in this entire scenario where everything looks so negative and so biased towards women, what is that positive reinforcement that we're looking at that is making women so complacent, or not, maybe, if that's the wrong choice of word, not shout out or something like that. So yeah.
Right. Like, in fact, one of the more interesting things that I've seen is, and this was, so I'm a former UPSC aspirant, and I was, so as part of it, I used to read the economic survey that used to come out. And I think in one of them, when they spoke about nudge theory, something that they suggested was having opt-out models instead of opt-in models, right? So wherein you are granted maternity leave regardless whether you asked for it or not at full pay, rather than you asking for maternity leave, right? Like an opt-in versus opt-out. thing. So the question was rather more along the lines of whether can we use nudge theory to kind of make more positive changes based on data. I think Gautam was, sorry, Muskan was recognized next, followed by Gautam, and then Juhi has raised her hand again.
So like, a lot of you have brought up maternity leave, especially within the Indian context. Why not also talk about how paternity leave is missing in this entire scenario, and the entire burden of bringing up a child is again intrinsically on a woman, and that is also problematic in ways. There is one thing that I really wanted to talk about was that, I understand that a lot of biases, especially like there are biases that exist that males do not understand, but there are also biases that are propagated by males, especially with respect to violence against women, harassment against women. Uh, Recently, only within like a friend of mine, she had to go through something wherein uh, a number of her college male friends made her feel uncomfortable without even realizing that they were making her feel uncomfortable. And on being called out, they weren't really apologetic about it. So, and this is not the first instance that I've heard of. I myself have gone through that. Um, there was this one time that I was groped inside Darbar Sahib, Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple. Uh, and my first thought was that it wasn't that why was I groped? It was basically how can it happen inside a spiritual place? So the idea that women are so easily under attack of the male gaze, that the thought that groping, like why was I groped, wasn't even a question for me in the first instance. It was like, how can it happen inside the Golden Temple? And this is, I mean, again, this is something that made me change my mind about reservations inside the Delhi metro. I used to be a lot against reservations in the like. I'm from Delhi, so I'm talking about Delhi here. Um, I used to be against reservations, but then again, there were instances like going to college from home. I I used to feel so uncomfortable wearing a dress, and I had to dress according to my means of transport, the place that I was visiting, the people I was going out with, and these questions, they keep hammering you. And to think of it that a guy never has to think of things in this way is it's something that's beyond my imagination. I mean, I don't even know how men live without this burden, because like there was this instance in the book where she talks about how she goes inside a building, and the first thought is that you think about all the exit points, that which exit should I take if God forbid something happens. This is something that happens with me when I'm traveling by cab all alone. I take a call, or I cannot sleep in the cab. I do not even put my earphones on. What if the cab driver is talking to someone and plotting something? Because this is a fear that's always at the back of my head, and it's really difficult to move on from, because the conditions are such that in the society. One more thing that I really wanted to talk about was the brilliance bias that the author talks about, how there are certain professions, or like for example, a woman is more apt for caregiving jobs that is the kind of mindset that exists in the society. And I think that is unconsciously taught through even in school. It took that particular part took me back to my school life, where I realized that wherever there used to be this heavy lifting कि अरे बच्चे एक table उठा के ले आओ या chair उठा के ले आओ, the teacher would automatically call out a guy and be like ये chair उठा के ले आओ. Otherwise कोई care giving job होता था, जैसे attendance लेना, monitor बनाना, it mostly used to be girls. And that is something that blew my mind away. I mean, I'm just really disturbed by this book at this point, because it's kind of made me look at the way in an even more darker shade, and there is no coming back from it.
Right. Muskan, like at this point in time, I just feel like I should be apologizing, like for us for recommending the book because that was not the intention for making people feel darker
No,
or unsafer.
but I think
But
it was extremely
right,
important for this, uh, for us
right,
to understand and broaden our horizons about understanding how
right,
exactly are discriminated. Because it's only books like these that even minute policy changes
right,
or changes in mindsets will occur. Today, we reading this, we are privileged people who are reading this. आगे जाकर when education will be more in reach for people and people will be reading this book, probably one of us who will be a policy maker in the future will probably assign this book for academics, and that is how changes happens. I think it's an extremely important book
right.
to read.
Right. Right. And Muskan, I'm glad that you brought up the point about the Delhi Metro because it takes us back to one of the key structural points made in the book, right? About how data and structural designs are against women. So this is something that I speak of from certain personal experience. I've studied in Delhi for 5 years and I live in Mumbai. I've lived here all my life. And one of the things that I've noticed earlier, it was something that I'd heard that Bombay is way safer than Delhi and one of the safest cities in metropolitan cities out there. And after living in Delhi, I can, at least for my one person singular empirical way, speak for such in such a manner. But my personal observation was it's a vicious cycle, right? Most public places in Delhi, something like say a Connaught Place, which is it's like at the center of the city, or South X, or like apart from your pubs and your nightclubs, most places shut down by 9 or 10. And also, so does your public transport, right? Your last metro runs at 11 or 10, I think I forgot, but one of the two, and starts at 6 in the morning, right? And you have no other way of public transport. You don't really have a very good public bus transport system, and you don't have metered auto rickshaws, right? All you have are your Uber and your Olas, which, because Delhi is an expansive city, is always costs a lot to travel. The opposite is true for Bombay. And obviously, the other way around also applies for Delhi, that because all of this happens because, well, people don't step out at night because it's unsafe, and that's why places don't open. The opposite is true for Bombay to the extent that from Bombay, the local trains run till 1:40 in the night and start working again at 3:20 again in the morning. So that's just like a 1 hour lull. You have almost practically 24 hours of public buses. You have taxis and autos which are metered, and because of that, public places are open, right? So I mean, there'll be a restaurant near, because trains are running till 1:40, restaurants near the station would be open till like 2 in the night, and so would be some kind of shops. It'll be lit, like not in the party sense, but like street light kind of thing lit, right? So this vicious structuring of things is also something that I think continuously plays into how women are constantly discriminated against. But let's just moving on. I think we have also a couple of things. Navya has left the meeting. She had a personal emergency that came up, and she couldn't really continue with the meeting. But we have I think Gautam was recognized next, followed by Uday, Sonal, and Juhi. Right? Let's go with that order. Right, Gautam. Can you? Yeah.
So I think, like, before like giving my narrative, I'd like to highlight 3 points so that it makes more sense. The first is that historically any societal change has taken decades, if not centuries. That's the unfortunate truth of it. Like, if you look at racism, it still exists after 1.5 centuries of a civil war being started. Second, I'd like to say that 9 out of 10 people would choose to die rather than change, and this is cited by a book called Change or Die. There was this group of people who were given a drug called statin twice a day, and the doctors told the patients, "Ki you have to have it twice a day for 3 months. Just having 2 pills, that's it. Otherwise, you'll die." And the first 2 weeks, people were like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's important for my survival. Otherwise, I'll die." Of course, there was this placebo experiment, but 90% of them failed to even have 2 pills a day to stop themselves from surviving. And the third thing that I wanted to highlight was that everything humans do, and as a society, it's a collection of human beings essentially. Everything humans do is driven more by urgency than by importance. Climate change was as important as it is, 50 years ago, but it is more urgent now because the damage done has been, is largely irreversible. So, like, those are the 3 points. So the first point when I say is that, there's this example in, I don't know if Siddharth would know about it, considering he studied law. So in the royal courts of Britain during feudalism, a family of peasants of 3 was cheaper than a horse. So the horse was sold for like 100 cents or something, and a family of peasants was sold for 33 cents. And it took them over 1.5 centuries to recognize that human beings are equal. So what I'm trying to say is that, and there were orders by Royal Courts of Britain. You can actually read a book called Man's Worldly Goods, and they say that a girl ran away with some other guy. She fell in love with a peasant's daughter, and the royal court magistrate ordered the girl to come back because she was a slave, because her father is a slave. So the ideas which look so absurd today took 1.5 to 2 centuries. So like what I'm trying to say is, when Muskan says that, those sexual assaults happen or things like that happen, unfortunately, if I don't think it would make anyone feel better about it, but the unfortunate reality, at least statistically, is that it is going to happen for the next century or so, because society is largely incorrigible. Second, it comes to how can we ramp up the speed of the change, right? So I think we talk a lot about, this being a very important issue. Of course, I think now becomes a question of making it more urgent rather than important. We know it's important, like undeniably for the majority of at least educated people in the world, accept the fact that it is important. Now it comes to, making it an urgent issue. Like, how do you make an urgent issue? uh Perhaps defiance, perhaps telling the structure, or I heard someone talking about harassment or discrimination happening at workplace. The only way to, like, ramp up the speed of whatever pace of societal change is to actually make it more urgent than important. So yeah, that's that.
Right. And yeah, thank you, Gautam, for pointing that out. Like particularly the bit about change coming when it's urgent, because I think, and I think even if you look back at India, we've always seen women rights being more, the evolution of women rights being more reactionary rather than like gradual process. Like if you look at the Vishaka judgment, which led to sexual harassment at the workplace laws being put in place, or like how rape laws were changed in India, or like as most of us would know about the 2012 gang rape and how that influenced the law. I think I know, and it just scares me to think at this point of time, Gautam, to what kind of more further urgency can we generate beyond this, right? I mean, it goes beyond, it's just beyond me at this point of time to imagine a far more urgent situation. Although as much as I agree with your point, I mean, it's not that I'm not in agreement with you, but it's just scary to imagine a world where this isn't urgent, but something worse than this would be deemed urgent enough to like, oh, okay, we do need to make a change now, right? Uh, I'm I'm so sorry, I've completely forgotten the order. I think Uday was recognized next. Am I right? Yeah. Hi.
I actually agree extremely with what Gautam said. I actually wanted to talk about that. Uh, First, I wanted to say that like mindset change. A lot of people who spoke said that mindset change is something that we need to do right now. But think about it. Most of the people who are authorities right now, or are senior older people, how often do you think they change their mindset? Not very often. Not very often at all. And historically, like you said, like the club thing, the major profession, the dominant profession that has been active historically has been a profession of strength, going to war, going on a farm, hunting from like early man stages. Doesn't matter. It has been like a game of strength. So maybe men were the dominant force over there. But right now, that is not the case. It's not an accident that women equality rights started coming up more in 1950s, 1960s at that time in the US, and maybe more recently like 1980s, 1990s in India. It's not an accident, because that is when changes started to happen, where the dominant profession stopped being about strength. It started being about intelligence, and intelligence wise women are equal to men. So that is where that will happen. And as far as change is concerned, already because of what has happened historically, a lot of rich men are in positions of power currently. That is how it is, and expecting them to relinquish this power for moral reasons is, I feel personally, not very practical, because they will not do it. They enjoy the fact that they are privileged, and of course, they will not let go of that privilege. So the mindset change, which it was just addressed. I feel like it will not happen instantaneously, and I will teach my kids to respect women and do as well as they can with it. But currently, right now, expecting the entire society to change their view on it, I personally feel is a little far-fetched and a little optimistic, I would say. I know it's not a very nice or a very encouraging thing to say, but I feel like that is true. There is no way in hell I'll teach my kids to be disrespectful, but I cannot change everyone in society who's being disrespectful or did something bad to women. I personally know this, I try to do it, but for the most part, I believe that that is not change that will happen instantaneously. I wish it was, but it was not. The second thing I just wanted to talk about is something. This is personally, I wanted a more of an opinion on this. So there's this generalized terminology that was put against, like it's almost as if, say something earlier, someone said the male gaze, all right, or say someone says the rape and stuff like that. There is this stigma that men are bad that is being pumped into women's ideology or whatever, and I feel like that has had a negative impact on women more than men. Of course, in men also it has been a this thing. For example, workplace, the Me Too movement has been revolutionary because more women have taken positions of power. A lot of men who are in positions of power who have done something wrong have uh, been taken down. But also, men are less likely to take women as their, like, be mentors to women. The risking, thinking that it might be a risk in the future. It's not a very nice thing to say, but like that is a practicality. So I just wanted your opinion on the fact that too quick a change can cause repercussions like this.
Right. Right. Uday, that's actually a very interesting point, and I actually wanted to bring that up right when you mentioned the Me Too movement, because this is something, again, I've noticed more on an empirical level where uh the change has rather come from a fear of being persecuted rather than recognizing a genuine issue on the that exists, right? It's not about, oh, okay, I see that my behavior might be a problem. It's just that, oh, my behavior will be called out and that might lead to shame and I'll cause a problem. So, and yeah, and I absolutely agree that I am, again, I am not an expert on this. So I might not be able to comment on the veracity or the long-term consequences of this, but I personally feel that it has quite a lot of negative impact in terms of how forward are we going with this, because the idea is to have people recognize the problem rather than just be fearful of what's happening, right? But okay, I think we have Sonal up next, followed by Juhi and then Muskan.
Yep. Hey, so like a couple of points were brought up in this whole discussion, and I would like to kick back and ask, your and the other men on this forum for a couple of opinions. So I have noticed, in my college, when I was admitted into computer science, like right now I'm working, but when I got the admission, so there's a women's quota. So my cutoff after my CET was a bit less than what a guy required to get into that college. So there was a negative connotation to it. So, like every boy in our class had that impression that, women have it easier. We did less, I don't know, prepared less and still got into a good college comparatively. But same person, like maybe equally intelligent boy might have missed out on an opportunity because he did not score 143, 143, suppose that's the score. I'll get into a good college, the boy will not. So like that's something I've faced, that automatically my credit is taken away, that okay, I've seen this, that men connotate as negatively, like even reservation, which I feel is very important, it connotates negatively. So how do we highlight this, or bring it to attention, it's not a negative thing, like how do we do that? And more so ever, like, even when I was discussing this book with my colleagues, I had this impression that, people were like, okay, I get it, you're a feminist, please stop talking, we know, please stop talking. That was like a major reaction to what I was trying to imply, that, we should change, or, this is something we should recognize. A general reaction I got was, okay, you're a feminist, please stop talking. That was something I've realized. And I was like, okay, I don't have words. I don't know how to tackle the situation. I'm like, I didn't know how to tackle it. So any pointers to, how to make people listen that, okay, like, this is some problem that we face, and this is something like, should be highlighted.
Right, right. Sonal, as you've asked for the men in the group to reply, at least I'll take my shot at these two things, the points you raised. The first one is, in fact, why we framed the fourth question on the questions we sent out, the point about intersectionality, because the point you raised about, someone who gets in through a quota, any sort of quota, whether it's a gender quota or it's a caste quota or it's a disability quota, is so it's this perception about why the quota is in place, right? It is not so for some there might be hundreds of reasons why it's in place, but for a very simple example, right, you mentioned, let's say a boy with the same score 143 and you with the same 143, you got into a better college than the other guy. But what doesn't actually go into account there is that the understanding of offering you a quota is because your opportunities have been deprived in life. Like someone, I think Juhi mentioned it at the beginning, that say if you're in an Indian household, अच्छा आपका पढ़ाई के साथ ये भी काम होगा कि कभी मम्मी पापा की चाय भी बना दो, रात के बर्तन में भी help कर दो. Like as much, it won't be expected from the guy. It might be something on maybe a boy with a more human mindset might actually end up doing, but it isn't an expectation from that person, right? The same thing goes for economically backward people, or like the scheduled
Agreed. I'm all for
community, right?
quota. The point is, like, how do we make people
Right,
realize that quota is necessary? That,
right,
it's a privilege to be a boy is just something that people don't recognize anymore in this world.
right. And I think biggest way to do it is to talk about it. I think like the biggest change, at least I tried to do personally, like for me, college was a revelation, and I think for a lot of people it is works that way. Is that, well, have those uncomfortable conversations, and this is something like I know some guys try and do with themselves, that force them to have this conversation that, okay, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right way of going about those things? As to for the other thing about, like, I don't have an answer for how do you respond to that, because I can understand how frustrating it can be, because uh in fact, if I could share a personal experience, this dates back to the previous Football World Cup of 2014. I think when it was Brazil versus Germany. So I come from my friend. I'm the only person in my friend group who doesn't watch football, but I'm part of a WhatsApp group which discusses football. And I think Germany decimated Brazil, or Brazil decimated Germany. Either one of the two ways. Like 7-1. It was a horrible, horrible match. Like they defeated them very badly. And someone changed the title of name of the group to Brazil rapes Germany, or Germany rapes Brazil, whichever one, like rape, something along those lines. And I raised an objection about it, right? And there was a tiny debate that went around it. And a few months later, someone made a sexist comment on another group with a similar set of people. And one of the comments was like, "Oh, dude, don't say this here. Siddharth is on this group." So I get your frustration about where this is coming from, and I still don't have an answer for how do you go about it, apart from just like being, even in that situation, call that person out on what they're doing, and just, I don't know. I'm so sorry about not being more helpful in this contribution. I think Juhi was up next, followed by Muskan, and I think then we'll be wrapping up the meeting. One thing, I just Juhi,
Yeah.
are you on mute? Yeah.
So I'll start answering with, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but your voice is breaking in the middle, Juhi.
it's probably because of the Wi-Fi connection. So anyways, I'll start with answering Sonal's question, is how do you respond to such things? And I think now everybody said that quick decisions and quick solution is not gonna happen for anything if it's about women being privileged at some places or having quota, or SC/ST having quota. But the only thing which we can do is we can start talking about, be outspoken about the stuff, because we know, and now it's important that we put out those thoughts with a lot of people, including men and women. And now, how do you address such things? Like Siddharth mentioned one of the example that if you want to pursue your degree, males are privileged one. You can be studying for 12 hours, but trust me, 63% of the population in India are under middle class. And those girls, they do not get the chance of spend more time into the studies because they have to help their mom and for the household work. That could be one reason which you can give it in a better way with the right example. Apart from that, what I see is, if we talk about 80s and 90s, when we were not allowed to go to school, we were not even allowed to go to work, or so at least we are not even asking for men to stop doing work, or simply cutting them out from studying, like things which has happened to us in the past, right? At least they are still allowed to go to college, they are still allowed to work, they are still allowed to do all the things which women are allowed to. And the only privilege which we have right now is that we get little extra privileges and we have a lot of opportunities as compared to men. Now, if I talk about 80s, men were already here in terms of education and being financially independent, and women were right here. I think it would be far if I had the space. Now, the reason why this Constitution Assembly and the committee had this reservation for SC/ST and women, even if you read the history, the modern history, if you read the two very basic concerns which had always talked about women's space and the lower caste space into our society, because it was very backward. And the only thing which our constitution has tried is let these people go with the same flow as they are giving, but give this extra push to the women and the minor communities from our country. So at some point, there could be a time where these two can come together. But if we talk about equality right now, so if you want equality, then I think this doesn't even make sense, because there will be no time when women and the minor communities will be able to cope up with the men and basically a higher caste men. So that is the one point which I think you can address whenever because I have been told a lot of time that, oh, you are a feminist, okay, let's stop. I have been always very outspoken about this since I was in college, because that was a time when a real eye-opening happened for me in a lot of other things. For Mushkan, I think this book is little dark. There has been a lot of points addressed, and I think it goes in our mind. But again, the only solution we have right now is, instead of being scared, start being outspoken, talk to more and more women, advise and suggest this book to maybe 10 more women, so they will read and then they will be aware. Try to speak to 10 more boys and men, and then they'll read this and then they will be aware. So such things is, you have to be bold, you have to be outspoken, and then you have to talk. Sometimes I have been in argument with my mom and dad that you talk about equality, you gave me opportunity to study, but still I was supposed to do all the household work. I have been cooking since I was, I think, 11 and 12 years old, and I am pro in cooking right now. So that is something which you have to go and talk whenever you are talking to someone. So I think that thing is is very important, and it should happen. Apart from that, stop using the terms like female entrepreneur, female leaders, female designer, or a lot of gender neutral, but especially in your Instagram profile, or even when you are Google searching, because being into the same field, I know how this SEO works. And if you search a female developer, then the images come. But just because for female developers you have searched and you have clicked to that particular picture, now that data has been stored in Google, and now that is more of a tension work for us, because I think till now it was a lot of things physical into the book and the notebook, and now everything is on the cloud and the data. So the more search is relevant according to our search, the whole system is gonna work. And if if we use female entrepreneurs in Instagram, post and a lot of other things, I think people will start considering, because nobody calls a male entrepreneur or nobody calls a male topper. I see UPSC, like I remember Shruti Deshmukh, she was like female topper. I'm like, we don't even have any quota in UPSC. We had to work exact hard enough as boys, and why do we get considered as a female topper? If we had a quota, I would like, okay, fine, calling female topper is still good. So such term is important that we start using gender neutral. I call myself a developer, I call myself an entrepreneur, and I do not use a term of female leader or female stuff. I think it's very important. I had few more couple of points which I totally forgot about the sexual harassment which has been happening.
Juhi, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we have very limited time left, and we have Muskan and Uday left to speak. So I'm so sorry, but I'll have to restrict you here. But something I'd really encourage you to do is, because you have so many points to offer, and I think all of us would be interested in them, you could probably send across some email on the group, like on the same thread, right? So that everyone can keep discussing this and taking it forward, because I think this is something everyone would like to chip in a lot more on. Okay, so without taking more time, I'm so sorry about this, Juhi. So sorry for doing this.
No problem.
I'll just pass this on to Muskan now, and then we'll have Uday as the last speaker.
I'm going to pick it up from where Juhi stopped. Why are we segregating like female entrepreneurs and male entrepreneurs? I genuinely think it's very important, and I think it was tackled very well in the book also, that when you just say entrepreneurs, the first idea is a male. When you talk about developers, the first idea is a male, and therefore to make sure that women have an equal representation in that, it's important to make that distinguishment. Also, with respect to like that, there was another example in the book where she talks about emojis, right? When the other companies were given the opportunity to make their own emojis by saying that, make a runner. The first emoji that used to pop up was the male jogger, right? And therefore, to ensure that there was equal representation for women there, they provided a female, they made that distinction between a male and a female jogger, which was important. Then again, I would like to come to, Uday talked about how we cannot expect a sudden change, which is true. I completely agree with that, that change does not happen within a day or within one conversation. It is an extremely long process, and it's a fight that we have to fight daily. But it's the small things where we can always start at to bring a difference. Like, for example, Siddharth talked about his personal experience. Last year, there was this male boy locker room chats that were leaked on Instagram, if you all are aware of that. I recently read a blog. I think I shared the link to that blog on our forum also. There was this person who was interviewed for the recent blog. She talks about how, we as women also become sexist within big groups, because that is just how conversation flows. Just like Sonal talked about how, it's extremely difficult to talk about these things because people just completely shut you out, and they aren't really ready to listen to you, and you are termed as a feminazi, and it becomes extremely difficult to put your point across. And also, I know a lot of guy friends like Siddharth who, take up the opportunity and call people out when they're being sexist or misogynistic or racist. But there again are a lot of friends that I know who are scared to talk about or call out their own friends because they will be made fun of in ways or called out in a funny way that, अरे मत बोलो सिद्धार्थ गुस्सा हो जाएगा या ये बंदा गुस्सा हो जाएगा. तो ये बहुत ज्यादा इस mindset को हमें change करना, and this can only happen when we as individuals take the onus upon ourselves, take the burden on ourselves to call people out without thinking about the repercussions it will have on us. Because at the end of the day, if you're not talking about or speaking out about what you strongly feel about, then you're not doing justice to your own thoughts or your own ideologies. Or, I mean, there is no point in having this conversation here talking about feminism or how women are the second sex, like Simon, who I talked about. Also, like Isha talked about her own personal experience in the metro. I completely agree with that. That we feel a lot more safer if we have a guard in the metro. Especially there have been times in college where I used to be late coming back home, and there used to be no one on the metro station, and I used to feel scared. So only if there was a provision for a guard who was there 24/7, I would have felt a lot more safer. Talking about quotas in college, I went to an all women's college, even though I went to a co-ed school. And the only reason I went to a women's college was because मेरे marks में अच्छे नहीं आए थे. But then again, the importance of a women's college I only understood after going there. Uh, there that is where my bubble of privilege and elitism just burst out, because I met a lot of other women who came from backward regions or backward castes who had taken up admission through reservations. And the fact that it was a women's college in the first place, these women talked about how, if it wouldn't have been for a women college, unko education hi na milta, because their parents are not very comfortable with them studying alongside males. And that is where you realize that uh, women institutions are important. But then again, it all circles back to this conversation where people bring, I have a lot of male friends who talked about why do we need women colleges, ऐसे तो men के लिए seats कम हो रही हैं. यही same मेरा thought process होता था before I entered college, कि reservations क्यों रख रहे हो, general category के लिए तो मेरे को seat नहीं मिलेगी. But then again, after difficult conversations, this bubble broke. This bubble burst, and that these are the difficult conversations that we need to have on a day-to-day basis without thinking about the repercussions, just like Siddharth did with his friends group. That is what men need to do, to take a stand about what they believe in, and that is how change is going to come. It's not going to be a one-day change, of course, but that is one step towards change.
Right. Thank you, Muskan. Uday, you were recognized to speak last, and I'm so sorry. I'll have to request you to keep it brief because we are running out of time of our scheduled time. But yeah, please go ahead, and I'll just unmute you, and we can wrap this up.
Sure. I'll keep it super brief.
Right.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, a lot of people brought up reservations, and I wanted to speak about it very specifically because I personally felt like that. Juhi said she was the people told that they were not okay with it, and when she was in college, and she got there through like a reservation from an equally intelligent boy not getting there. I see the point because I was one of those guys. I personally felt like that because when you are in that situation, it's just you and the girl. You don't see right now where I am. I've graduated. I have a reasonably good job. I'm reasonable right now. It is a woman's issue. But when you're in a college, for that kid, for him, it is just like that girl is here at a better position than I am. So, and that I feel, of course, it requires change and all, but I see why they would have that kind of a thought process. This I wanted to personally speak because right now I've changed my opinion on it. But then this is what I thought. And I see the need for reservation. This is again something that I personally educated myself with. Again, reason why the book was great. I need to educate myself about it. Because reservations, this I didn't realize until it. For example, backward caste reservations. The primary reason for backward caste reservations, I'm not sure how many of you know this, you might, but was to reduce crime. An uneducated backward caste man was more likely to commit crime than an educated backward caste man was a theory that was bought in, which caused it to bring up reservation. Women's reservation is the same thing. Think of it not being there and how many more women will be educated. And again, the solution being me, I teach my next generation and you teach your next generation to the point where they will actually get it. That is the only thing. I cannot personally like infect change in the entire society. I believe I'm not that great a leader. All I can do is try to correct my friends when they say stupid sexist stuff. I'll teach my kids to be respectful of women and understanding, and I try to do it. I'll do my best with it. That is all I can say. And I understand there is an immediate need for it, but
right.
I mean, there is only so much we can do.
Right. Thank
so
you.
much
There.
for adding me in
Thank
this.
you.
I'm so sorry for
No,
keeping.
please don't apologize. And I know, I understand it's a somber note to end on. It's not a very uh great note to end on because we haven't reached anywhere with this particular part of the discussion. But that's the beauty of the forum that we have. We can continue discussing this with how many people soever we want on the email thread. But thank you everyone for joining in. This was absolutely wonderful. I think it's one of the best discussions we've had out of the four ones we've had till now. Uh, and I'm glad that more all of you gained a lot out of the book more than enjoying the book than anything else. A quick reminder on the passage not giveaway. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out an email with the instructions as well, but it's pretty basic. All you've got to do is go to Instagram or Facebook, put up a post or a story about how excited you are about for the book. You have to tag Kitabi Karwan, Dust Off Your Books, and Penguin India in it, and we'll be picking three winners. And you have to do this by the end of any time before tomorrow ends. That's before 11:59 tomorrow Indian time, right? So yeah, that brings me to the end of this meeting. Thank you so much for joining in, and yep, you guys are in for a treat with the giveaway. The other group is in for a treat with Archel's interaction. I'll try and make sure that the interaction video like we try and open it up for more members if we can, if there is space, or at the very least send out like a part of like the video of the interaction to the people on at least on the book club. And uh yeah, I got a question from Bhavna on the group. Can we send a screenshot if the account is private? Yes, of course you can. Please, you don't need to make your account public just to win the giveaway. You can send a screenshot that you've taken part in the particular opportunity, and you can email it either to me or to Navya, right? Or if you tag us, we'll get notified, or you can just send us a DM. It's quite informal that way. Don't worry about it, right? But just make sure you communicate it to us. Anyway, lovely having all of you on this discussion, and I'll see you next month with the next month's books. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.